1, 0. Hello, everyone. It's Martin Willis with the Everything Else Show, and welcome. Tonight's guest is fascinating. Talked to him, I think it was like a year ago first, somewhere around there. His name is Zoltan Istvan. He lives in my old stomping grounds out in California. We actually just found out we only lived a few miles apart. Where he lives now is only a few miles away from where I was. Anyway, and we're going to be talking about all kinds of things. AI I'm very interested in, and all that. So real excited to have the guest. And Zoltan, how are you? Welcome to the show.
Oh, I'm doing good. Thank you for having me.
And can you tell us, hang on just 1 second, I have something I have to change right here. Let's see. Okay. Can you tell us what transhumanism is, first of all? That's very interesting to me, and I have a lot of questions about that.
Absolutely. So transhumanism is a social movement of a few million people around the world, maybe larger now. And we want to use science and technology to radically modify the human being and also to modify the human experience. But it can be anything from exoskeleton suits to get disabled people out of a wheelchair. It can be chips inside your brains that allow you to telepathically connect with somebody else. It can be driverless cars if you want to go that far. But usually it's really radical technology, gene therapies that allow you to grow an extra arm or something of that nature. That's what transhumanism really is.
And is there any of that is going on right now? I know I watched a show where you said you had a chip in your finger. I don't know if you still do, but is there any of that is in progress right now?
An enormous amount is in progress. In fact, it seems like every 2 months, the amount of technology out there doubles. So I have a tiny chip implant about the size of a grain of rice. It's so small you can put it in with a syringe, and it opens my front door. You can do things like give business cards just by touching somebody's phone. In fact, mine even sends out a text message because I was running in 2016 as a presidential candidate, and mine said, win in 2016. So if I enter a room and someone got close enough to me, their phone would get an automatic text message. They, of course, have the right software that said win in 2016. But, that's just the tiny type of technology. The stuff they're really working on is, for example, genetic editing. Time Magazine, even though Donald Trump won Person of the Year, the top 5 was genetic editing this last year. And that's because they're already, Chinese are working on modifying the embryo, and trying to augment intelligence with genetic editing. We also have the possibility to maybe eliminate malaria because we can genetically edit some mosquitoes, and then they can kind of spread, and then all of a sudden you will only have a certain type of mosquito that doesn't breed malaria. So these technologies already exist. And of course, we have artificial cars, and about 500,000 people around the world already have some sort of brain implant. Mostly it's for disability to help with Parkinson's, Alzheimer's. A lot of them are cochlear implants. Deafness doesn't really exist anymore. If you have the technology, we can give you a hearing aid that now connects to your hearing nerve and basically hear what we hear. So all these transhumanist technologies are basically already here. The real question is, what are the next ones coming, like AI, in 5 or 10 years?
Yeah, the one thing that scares me about when you mention genetic changes and higher intelligence, and that also is something that scares me a little bit about AI as well. As as history has shown us, when there's a higher intelligence, that higher intelligence usually takes over. Is there any type of way to regulate something like that before it gets out of control?
Yeah, well, yes, of course you can regulate it, and a lot of people are calling for regulations. However, a lot of this technology, like with artificial intelligence, yes, I agree with you. Like, I'm not sure I want an intelligence that's as smart as a human being or far smarter than a human being on planet Earth. I'm not sure there's a reason that we want that. The same thing with genetic editing. Yes, I would like to augment the intelligence of my children, but I don't want my neighbor having a child that's twice as smart as my kid, biologically or just genetically. All of a sudden, too much inequality can occur. So surely some of this is going to need a lot of consideration. And, a lot of my campaigning has been based on, as a political candidate, has been based on just trying to spread a message that a lot of the politicians who have been elected won't touch these subjects because they're so thorny, they're so challenging, and everybody gets like, oh my God, the world's going to end. And in many ways, it's true. Humanity might end either through artificial intelligence or this genetic editing, because we're entering sort of the Star Wars phase where is being a biological human being the most functional type of entity that should be on planet Earth? And what if we can make ourselves superior to that? And these are very, very thorny questions. I don't have all the answers, but I try to spread the questions because I think asking the questions is very important.
Well, yes. Another thing, it kind of reminds me a little bit of, juicing in athletes in a way, because, they have an upper advantage. I said jokingly before, they should make it mandatory that everybody has to take, steroids or whatever it is that, so it's an even playing field again. So, but it's kind of, in a way, it's a little bit similar that, if someone has an upper edge over the other one, and those are going to be only the high, wealthy people, aren't there? That's the way it looks right now.
Well, and that is the truth. And that is why I have said again and again, whatever campaign I'm running, is that I'm not part of that 1%. I don't belong to that. And therefore, I want to protect myself, my family, my parent, my mother and all these other things because, and my community, because we don't want the 1% to take artificial intelligence and become super great, whatever transhumanist entities. And nor do we want them to increase their intelligence so it's 5 times ours. The rich already have some very distinctive advantages. They live 25% longer lives. They have better medical stuff, whatnot. So, a lot of my job has been trying to say, how as a society can we make sure that everybody has access to these technologies? And that way, as a society, we can move forward. Because I do love the technologies, but I would hate it if I was this guy out there on the mountaintop calling for this transhumanist future, and all of a sudden it becomes a dystopian future. And now only a certain segment of the population has it. We must tread very carefully to make sure that everybody has access to all these radical technologies coming out.
Right. What about? I've heard it said that the first person to live to say 1,000 years old has been born already. That's just that. I think that's someone else in California working on longevity, which I don't know if I really agree with that statement or not. But how long could a human body live through, say, stem cell or, say, bionic? I heard you say in an interview, if you had a bionic heart or something like that, you could live forever virtually, or whatever it is you said. I don't want to misquote you. But if you could do something with the organs, it's the brain, that you really wouldn't be able to do anything with. But how long do you think a human body could live if it had outside help?
Well, in my opinion, and I'm an optimist, we're on the cutting edge of the next 10 to 15 years. Segments of the population are going to reach this kind of escape velocity where all of a sudden we can now live in much, much longer, at least to 120 to 150, because of things like 3D printed organs or stem cell technology or genetic editing, or even just bionic hearts and bionic organs. Most people die from organ failure. So if you can stop that organ from failing, either through a pancreas that doesn't have cancer because it's robotic, or a heart that just keeps pumping through all the blood vessels, even though a lot of them are kind of sort of clogged, then you can keep people alive. And then it's really just a matter of keeping the brain alive. And so the body's going to be quite easy. I say in 10 to 15 years, we're going to be there with the body. The question is, how do we keep our minds from decaying? And that's where a lot of stem cell technology and especially genetic editing comes into the picture. And I have no doubt in my mind that we're going to be able to not only stop aging, but reverse aging probably within 15 to 20 years. When you say the first person's built for, is going to live 1,000 years, is already born, I would wager all my limbs, I would wager all my money, I would wager everything on that. There's no question in my mind that anyone under 50, barring a major tragedy or barring something like cancer in the next 10 years, is going to have that opportunity to live that long, again, the bigger question is actually the social one, which is, will governments allow it? Will the rich allow it? We have an overpopulation problem then, which we already do. These are kinds of issues that are the bigger grand issues, but I think the science is going to be there. You can see it. In just this last 2 years, I mean, finally, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars have started pouring into this life extension field. And it's not just one way. You're not going to make the human being live longer through a pill. It's going to be through a multitude of factors, bionic organs, reversing aging through genetic therapies, which people are already trying, stem cell injections, which now are commonplace for a huge assortment of maladies. So, I mean, we're on it. We just got to keep out of any world wars, make sure the Earth keeps its trajectory economically, and probably in 10 to 15 years, you will be hearing so much about this life extension or immortality movement, because it'll be very rare that people die if we have the opportunity to use things like genetic editing to completely rewrite our code. I mean, people die, a third of everybody you know dies from heart disease. So it makes perfect sense to spend $1 trillion to develop an artificial heart, which some companies are already doing now. And of course, then a third of people don't die from heart disease now, So the bigger question is, how do we get our brain to live indefinitely? Because at some point, the biological, if we can't renew it through stem cells or something, then it gets old, we'll get Alzheimer's, and nobody wants to live forever with Parkinson's or something like that. And that's where uploading our mind, or with things like what Elon Musk is doing with the neural lace, where you connect directly to the cloud. And that will also come, but that'll be more like 20 or 30 years.
Wow. It's funny you mentioned the government. I thought of that too. And part of the reason I thought of that is, for instance, Social Security. People live, say, 100 years or on average. Now, how are we going to support that? Is the working age, everything could be affected socially, like the age of retirement could be extended, but then there'll be people left behind that won't be able to afford it or whatever, So there's all that, those implications as far as money goes and longevity.
Well, and that's one of the things that I'm trying to do, is not just tell people how cool the technology is, but come up with social solutions, because it's not even just like what kind of job you have. It's like, are people going to get married if they're going to live 1,000 years? I mean, are they going to have children if they're going to, would they have children the first 500 years? Like, it changes our institutions dramatically. But I think the one thing that is definitely going to happen, and you're already seeing it, is like, driverless trucks are going to wipe out all the trucking industry. There's 4 million truckers in America. What are these people going to do? And then what are they going to do when we have robot waitresses or waiters? What are we going to do when all the banks become? And this is already happening. So in my opinion, probably within 15 years, 75% of jobs will be replaced by technology or robots or AI. So at some point, the government has to step in, because it's not just Social Security. You can't just Social Security is definitely not going to make it. The real question is, do we provide a basic income, or do robots pay taxes, or whatever, all these different types of scenarios. I support a basic income in my campaign. But I also realize that, I don't believe capitalism can survive in the form it is when just a group of conglomerates own all the robots that do all the jobs. And so we have to make something so there's no revolution, because there will be a revolution. This is why I said the main factor going against transhumanism is, do governments around the world allow transhumanism to continue? Because it does mean leaving behind our historic institutions, like marriage, like having children, like working. I mean, we're going to have to get used to a very new type of American dream if we have bodies that live forever, and we also don't have to work because there are no jobs. I mean, this is a very different world.
And along that same way, that same line of what you're talking about here, what about, say, third world countries? How can they possibly survive through something like this?
Well, the good news is that as technology comes out, it comes out even more quickly than it ever did before. At this point, many third world countries in Africa don't have clean water. But almost everybody, even if you live in a mud hut, has some type of cell phone. And that's been one of the interesting developments about capitalism, is that a lot of people are still very hungry, but they might have access to a kind of phone. In fact, I have this little phone. My 3-year-old daughter carries it around and just plays with it. It doesn't work anymore. But it's amazing that this kind of technology, is available probably still does work, and we throw that stuff away now because it's not even worth pennies. And yet everybody around the world has it, but not everybody has food or clean water. So, I'm still focused more on getting them the basics. Yeah. And that's why I think a basic income or something better would support them. But I think they're going to have access to the transhumanist technology. I think that and the vaccines and stuff like that will come because it gets so cheap that they'll have access. But, getting clean water and food, that's still very hard.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. So what are some, you talked about driverless cars. I know, I saw even a number of years ago, the Google car, I think it was out there. I think I'm all for driverless cars. I know a lot of people are scared to death. They say they'd never sit in one and all that. But eventually the technology is going to get so great that insurance companies are going to want to have driverless cars because there won't be any accidents.
Well, even more importantly, many insurance companies are right now a little bit skeptical of the driverless car because they know that they're going to go out of business. I mean, the great thing about driverless cars is their accident rate is so much dramatically less. For example, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, one of the largest nonprofits in America, everybody knows it because, they've been fighting against drunk driving. Well, drunk driving is going to go the way of the dinosaurs. There's not going to be any more drunk driving because people they'll be drunk in the back of the car, but the cars won't. And it's the same thing with the insurance companies where at some point it's not going to even make sense to insure a car more than just a basic because accidents are so much lower with driverless cars. And we're talking like 70, 80% lower, and they're going to get far better. So, we're talking again against a revolution in terms of transportation. And I've just had this conversation with a friend, for me to fly from San Francisco to LA, the flight is only about 60, 70 minutes, but to actually leave my house, get to the airport, get on the plane, go through a security, then go land, take the taxi, and finally get to my a driverless car at night will take 6 or 7 hours. You'll get in the back, sleep, instruct it, and it'll take the exact same amount of time, except you'll have your car there and won't have to rent a taxi. Mm-hmm. So these are some of the things that I think a lot of people don't think about when they think, wow, the miracle driverless car is going to hurt airlines too, especially short-range ones.
Yeah, anything has an effect, no matter what it is. Uber, you name it, any new technology, any new idea, it's going to disrupt someone or something. But I think I actually can't wait for the driverless car because I'm getting tired of driving. But, sitting in traffic, that won't be happening hardly.
No, traffic will disappear. People and a driverless car won't look at an accident, and that's one of the main issues when you're on a freeway. You see an accident, everyone slows down. Well, and an AI vehicle is going to go right past that. Won't think about that. I never thought of that, and I never actually thought about the drunk driving aspect of it. And I forget. I read statistics at one time how many people die per year from alcohol. It's a lot. There's over 100,000 alcohol-related deaths with cars every year. It's around the planet. America is something like 30. I think there's around 38,000 car deaths every year in America. I'm not sure how many are alcohol-related, but it's a huge, huge problem. Impairment is giant, and this is, when you talk about humanitarian causes, people who put forth the driverless car are really doing us a service. I have 2 young children. I don't want them to get into I don't want them to, worry about driving, and that's going to be a great thing for a lot of people.
Right. I had a gentleman that helped me out with this with my website, and he had a couple of questions he wanted me to ask. Sam Boswell is his name, and he had a couple of questions he wanted me to ask you. And one of them, what are the risks of transhumanism? Nothing is without risk, so there has to be something.
Well, to be honest with you, for me right now, the largest risk is that we live in a very religious nation, and a lot of religious people worry that transhumanism is the work of the devil or the work of something that's Antichrist-like or end times. And I worry that people might want to shut down transhumanists or, I built my futurist career off my novel, The Transhumanist Wager, which pits fundamental religious people against these ultra-radical scientists who are trying to make us live indefinitely and use technology as this great enhancer. But we live in a country where a lot of those technologies are very dangerous. Our vice president has, said genetic editing is really is dangerous, and they know these kinds of things. So will they allow it, or will there be civil strife? Will there be riots in the street? I worry that is going to set society back very far. We've had this historically happen where, in the Renaissance, scientists were burned and stuff like that. So I think for me, a lot of the great challenge is trying to convince religious people that this is just an uber form of healthcare. It's not in any way against religion. It's actually perhaps what God had intended people to want to create with the tools of their hands. But that's a very hard thing to say, because a lot of people may say, wow, modifying the human being is not something we're supposed to do. So I think that's, for me, the biggest danger, because if Congress gets together and shuts down transhumanism, like as soon as genetic editing came out 2 years ago, they said, let's put a moratorium on it, just like we put a moratorium on stem cells.
Yep.
George W. Bush did that for 7 years during his presidency. It turns out now stem cells is one of the most used, best medicines of the 21st century, except we lost 7 years of it, perhaps hundreds of thousands of lives. So this, for me, is a dangerous conflict with no easy answer, except to try to make transhumanism a less loaded word or less loaded concept, more healthcare oriented.
Right. And the one thing I think about more than anything, as far as, say, artificial intelligence and some type of transhumanism, almost like bionic, I'm thinking, is the super soldier, military. I think more than anyone, they're going to want to get, involved in this.
Well, yeah, and I have been consulting with the U.S. Navy, and I can tell you that artificial intelligence is a significant kind of worry, because we have this ability of a machine to maybe send viruses across all the computers in the world, take over power grids, take over water grids, take over stoplights in major cities, cause havoc in traffic and things like that. And that's a national security issue. In fact, that's a global security issue. Terminator is not just some crazy sci-fi movie. Terminator is a very real thing to worry about, and I worry about it. I think a lot of the other experts worry about it. And so I think, super soldiers kind of goes along with that, this idea that I don't know if I want armed drones in the sky controlled by the government, watching my every move, able to send a missile into my house from, 80 miles away. And yet, in many ways, that's already the state of living that we have. Should we have a riot or something in California, and you could very, very quickly see the National Guard send out drones, and those kinds of things could happen. So I agree, unfortunately, if we want to stay on top from a military perspective, then we also don't want to let the Chinese do it first, or the Russians to do it first. So we're kind of in this terrible catch-22 where, it's forward with the military in transhumanist terms in order to, quote, protect ourselves from other, countries that might use this technology unwisely and dangerously.
Right. Sam also has this question here. What will happen to those people that do not want to get technically involved or evolve?
Well, I have always suggested that we should completely let everybody have 100% freedom not to do it. I feel like, I don't know if they would become sort of like the Amish or something like that, but as a libertarian, I feel very, very strongly that everyone should have a choice what they choose. If they want to get a chip like me, they can. If they don't, they don't. If they want to drive their own cars, they can. Those are kinds of things that are very important to me, especially to make sure this transition to this transhumanist age goes over smoothly. But I also understand, if you want to get a corporate job and you're not in social media, it's very difficult to get a corporate job in social media. You have to be represented already on the internet. And that's sort of the way the world has evolved, is that if you're not a part of what's happening technologically and socially, then it's increasingly hard to get a good job. And I think people should always have that freedom, but I would be very surprised if a lot of people did not take especially a lot of the medical upgrades that are going to come. It'd be like, refusing your arm got chopped off in a war zone or in a car accident and not taking the robotic arm, which can already grab beers, which can already play the guitar again and things like that. Most people will take it because, they're not losing their humanity. They're just augmenting their body to get back into good health.
How far away do you think we are right now from being able to upload your brain, your thoughts?
Well, we used to all say like 20, 30 years. The problem is that there's been so much advancement in this, what we call field of telepathy and brainwave EEG field. And now there are literally hundreds of Silicon Valley companies jumping on it and putting in tens of hundreds of millions of dollars. Elon Musk recently started a company called, working on this thing called the neural lace, which will allow you to tap into the cloud. There are hundreds of thousands of traders around the world dealing Wall Street and whatnot. They're all going to be replaced within 4, 7, or 8 years. I mean, some of the largest hedge funds have already come out saying we're going to be replacing mid-level management because we can have AI do that job better. So unless we have a way in our brains to directly connect to the cloud, and that means not necessarily uploading, but directly using brainwaves to think with the machine, we're going to be out of jobs. And when Wall Street traders lose jobs, these are some of the smartest people we have on the planet with some of the best degrees. We're all going to lose jobs. So my general guess is that, and they've said, Elon Musk said on the record, probably in 4 years there'll be a working type of neural lace where you can think into the cloud. And that sounds about sensible given other companies I've talked to. I'd say in 10 to 15 years, a lot of us will have this ability through brainwave headsets to think to each other. We might not do this probably in 10 years where we use headsets and things like that. Our connection will be directly through our minds, maybe just wearing one single little thing that's tapped in on our here, or even embedded, like a chip implant. That'll be a choice how people do that. But I could see that happening in 10 to 12 years. You have to understand, a lot of these technologies are motivated by how much money these corporations can make. And this thing that I just mentioned, this neural lace, is the way to save capitalism. We don't need to replace our traders with AI if we can become one with AI. That's one way to keep it so that jobs can continue indefinitely because we can think just like the machines.
Wow. Well, as it is right now, Wall Street is kind of scary when it comes to the algorithms and how quickly, trades are happening. And it's hard to believe that it can go faster than it is. But now you're talking about a human being piped into the whole thing. Is that what you mean?
Well, yes, and I think you have to understand. I think the main thing here is humans don't want to lose their jobs. Not all of us want to lose our jobs. I mean, what I'm trying to say is the people that are Wall Street traders are some of the most sophisticated, well-educated, wealthy people on the planet. When you tell them, when you tell someone who just graduated with a Harvard MBA, you're going to lose your job in 5 years because a machine replaces you, he's going to say, hell no, how do I stop that? And the lawyers will get together, Congress will get together. And I honestly believe that one way to keep our relevance against machines is to be much more connected to them. And this could include upgrades to our bodies. If you want to be builders, construction, I mean, we already have this idea that you could wear exoskeleton suits and lift 2 or 3 times what you want. And, the military is starting to say, put on exoskeleton suits because they allow these guys to walk for 24 hours instead of only being able to walk 12 hours and then die, passing over from exhaustion. So all these technologies we can integrate into our own bodies, including tapping into the cloud with brainwaves and brain thoughts. And that would be one way to keep our sense of humanity while also staying competitive to machines. And I think a lot of people like that because these Wall Street traders are like, hey, I'd like to have the power of a calculator in my brain. I'd like to be able to Google instantaneously in my thoughts. So, that's kind of where I think the key is. And that's why I think there's been a huge amount of companies recently that are starting to set up this idea of something that allows our brain waves to connect directly into machines. That's the way to make sure AI doesn't run loose. We're never going to get Terminator if a human being is inside it. Then we're going to get maybe a human being Terminator. I mean, I understand there'll be evil dictators or whatnot, but we're always going to have at least the mammalian element, this idea of our humanity is with us. So a lot of people want to merge with machines, but not just let machines become this great evolved type of entity. I certainly don't.
Now, what is, I've heard of the singularity, and what is the difference between transhumanism and singularity?
Well, so transhumanism is really the social movement that would ultimately lead to a singularity. A singularity is generally a point in time when so much artificial or machine intelligence has gathered so much power or evolutionary power that it sort of leaves behind human thinking. What people like to say is the singularity is almost like meeting God or something of that nature. You can't understand it anymore. It's beyond our, our brains are 3 pounds of meat. Let's be honest, that's what they are. Well, the singularity is when your brain becomes 100 pounds of meat or something like that in terms of neural connections, millions and millions of times smarter. And at some point, because of the J curve of how intelligence grows, it keeps evolving even quicker. So your evolution of IQ points can double, quadruple, and then, it can basically exponentially shoot through the roof. So what you experience in 1 year of life can be more than we've experienced in intelligence growth in the entire history of intelligence. So that's really what the singularity is. And yes, it's a quasi-religious component of transhumanism. I don't really think about it much because it's so far out of the realm, but it's certainly a very interesting point to say, well, what actually happens? What's the end game for transhumanism? Well, it's the singularity.
Okay. So back to the question that I asked you, someone on the message board wanted to know, kind of wanted you to elaborate more on the question, do you think it'll be possible to upload a mind to a computer?
So the answer is yes. We have already, to some extent, uploaded thoughts to machines. Just so there are headsets out there that you can lift a drone by thinking it. In fact, they have drone races already just using brain power, where you think thoughts and drones race around a track. We've gotten so sophisticated with this telepathy type of idea where you send out brain signals. So the question is, how does the machine interface actually grab that signal and then translate it into a machine? Well, it develops algorithms, it stores the memory, and then it figures out, well, that brainwave was exactly like this, and that means it's green or that means it's blue. Now use it like a calculator and start producing software and programs around that. And then all of a sudden you're like, well, wow, that's just like Zoltan's thoughts, or that's just, whoever's thoughts. And if you do that enough times, you can actually recreate a very real sense of who you are. And some people are doing this with people that are like Wired Magazine just ran a big story on someone who did this to his father. They downloaded a ton of the father's thoughts. They got a ton of what the father had thought, and they programmed it into an AI. And now that AI can respond basically very similar to how the father was. Now, it's not perfect, and we're not even close to really completing a full consciousness. But, a person that you talk to doesn't have that much sophistication unless you really get into these things. You can often find out what they like, or you can, what they want to know, or what their daily routines would be. So it's pretty easy to recreate a semblance of somebody. Of course, it's going to be 10 to 15 years before we really start getting into that idea that your mind is through this machine, my mind, and then I can recreate exactly who I am. And at some point, that will be one way of living indefinitely is that. But most transhumanists would say, me inside a machine is not necessarily me, because I'm still here. I think a lot of transhumanists want to make sure that there's only one them, and that one them always remains one. It doesn't matter if you go into a machine, but you can't have two of me, because then you just have a clone. Mm-hmm. So those are some of the options. But the technology is coming, and we are already so far in terms of uploading various thoughts and using algorithms to produce them back.
Yes. Leslie in the chat room kind of wants to know, along those same lines, if the idea is to live forever, how much of our bodies and minds can be replaced and still have self maintained?
I got to be honest, that's the $1 million question, because, and I get this asked all the time, when do you go from being a human to being a transhuman entity? And I'm not really sure. I've said before that, okay, if you have 5 major cyborg parts, then that already qualifies you as something that's more than just human being. But it probably would take maybe something like 50% of your flesh to be gone in order for me to say, okay, you're now more cyborg than you are human. And I think in terms of that, so that would require like half your body or something like that. And I think, we're only a year or two away from people, biohackers, electively cutting off their arms or limbs and replacing it with bionic ones. Because while the bionic ones are still a few years away from being as good as the human ones, there's people that want to do it just because they want to experiment. And in the end of the day, you're going to be able to take off your arm again and get the next upgrade. This has been the problem with my chip, is my chip's been obsolete already for about a year. You have to constantly replace this stuff. And we're going to get to a point when a lot of our body parts will be replaced as there are upgrades, sort of like we would replace parts on our cars. And I think, But in order to answer that question, yeah, I'd say to be more of a cyborg, you probably have to be more than 50%. But as long as we have our brains, I'm not sure we're really going to be anything other than ourselves. I think when you start messing with consciousness, and it's not you, it's not your same memories, because in the end of the day, it's our memories, it's our care, our love, our family. These are a lot of the things that constitute us. So if we even transfer ourselves into virtual reality and still feel those same ways, I might still say, hey, this is mostly me. Even if I am data, it's still Zoltan.
Yes. We have a scientist, a friend of mine's in the chat room, and he was saying that, science doesn't really understand memories. So how, if they can't understand them, how could they possibly be transferred? Are you able to tackle that one?
Well, just there have been some experiments that have been recently hitting where they've been actually implanting memories into rodents, and so those rodents believe that they know these kinds of things. So you're right. While we don't fully understand memories, we actually can recreate them in certain ways that, at least at this point, animal life can take that and say, oh, that seemed to be something that happened to me, and therefore I'll turn right at this intersection or left in this kind of maze, and that would work. And so I think it's going to take a little bit longer. And this is why when a lot of people ask me, can we live indefinitely? Well, yes, we're going to be able to make your body live indefinitely very shortly. The real problem is we still don't understand consciousness. We don't understand a lot about quantum mechanics. We don't understand a lot of the kind of most difficult questions that actually make a brain work. So what we might end up being for a long time, unless we have some very serious breakthroughs, is just very bionic entities with brains where we try to continually recharge our brain instead of brain cells dying. Maybe stem cell treatments would work. Right now, that hasn't really worked yet. But we might end up being very much machines carrying around these human brains because we haven't figured out consciousness. And consciousness is, it's a mystery. There's no question about that.
Right. I know there's a lot of debates about what consciousness is. So Sam also has this question. What's your thoughts on what might be the first successful mainstream commercial technical implant?
Well, so, this last week has been a very huge week for implants because a company in Wisconsin had a chip party. So they took 80 of their employees and said, we're going to give you free chip implants. They only cost about $50. And we set up vending machines downstairs. And from now on, when you check in, you're just going to swipe your hand. You don't need punch cards anymore or anything like that. So it was a little bit weird, but national, even the New York Times did a story on it. The problem, though, is that while it has ability to use it at vending machines, in order for me to really be a believer in my chip, I want to go to Starbucks and swipe. I want my credit card tied to it. And I think until we find a universal payment system of an implant, it's not going to catch on in a way that's that useful. This implant can't be tracked. This is not that different than what we have in animals. It can, start your car. It opens my front door and my door. I just swipe my hand. I don't need keys. And that's very useful. As a surfer or somebody who likes to go jogging, I hate to carry keys. So but we're going to need a payment system. And when someone comes up with a universal payment system and Visa and MasterCard jump on board, you're going to see everyone get this because an implant the size of a grain of rice can literally replace about 30 or 40% of your phone. And of course, it costs a fraction. Well, not a fraction, but just implants really only cost about $10 or $20. That's how cheap they're going to get. And when that starts happening, people are going to say, I'm not going to buy a $700 iPhone. If this does 30 or 40% of those things.
Wow. Do you think there are a lot of risks to where things are going? Like Elon Musk thinks that AI could be the end of us all. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I tend to agree with Elon Musk on the AI. I think there's no reason to have an intelligence as smart as a human being on planet Earth. Because it could very quickly become much smarter. And then it can devise ways that we can't shut it down because it's smarter than us. If that happens, why would we invite something that's that much smarter than us when we don't know if it's going to be good or bad? If we knew it was going to be good, I'd say, sure, let's have something smarter than us. But we wouldn't be the top of the food chain. So I worry about these technologies. But generally speaking, technology and radical science have helped the human race out. Over the last 30 years, lifespans have increased, been less people dying from war and things like that. So there's a good historical pattern for saying that radical science, radical technology helps lives, saves lives, makes lives better and longer. But we might come to a tipping point with AI, whereas all of a sudden just one person turns on a flick of a switch, and now the whole world very quickly goes like that. And I especially think this is a very, very important national security concern. Imagine if Russia or North Korea were to reach AI first and use that against the American military. Let's say they were to essentially throw all our military computers into whack because they have one machine that can outthink all of our engineers. And that's a very real security threat. In fact, I've said before that the most important national security issue of the decade is going to be who gets to true AI first, or artificial general intelligence, which is an intelligence that's equivalent to human beings. And there's a race going on. It's a race as much as exciting as anything of the arms race with the Cold War. And you're going to be hearing huge amounts about it, because it would be worth spending trillions of dollars if it means being a democratic nation reaching that artificial general intelligence first, rather than some rogue nation, and all of a sudden them using it against us to make all our, they could, for example, in a flick of a switch, make all the GPSs and all the 16,000 flights above America right now stop. I mean, can you imagine what kind of chaos could happen? And that's just one thing. It could turn off all the lights. All the power grids could be shut down. I mean, honestly, they could not only trillions of dollars being lost daily because of stock market shutdowns, but you could send countries back almost to the dark ages. What would happen in a city like New York or San Francisco if nothing ran? I mean, most people have no idea how to survive. In fact, this has been the stuff of science fiction novels. And that's why it's so important that we have either reach artificial intelligence first, because the key is whoever reaches it first gets to control all the other artificial intelligences. If we have the smarter AI, our AI will be able to be the one who stops any other AI from developing. I call this the AI imperative. Whoever reaches the very first or smartest AI will be able to keep tabs on all the other AIs. And if they start developing too far, they'll be able to shut them down. It's like, it works quite different than nuclear warfare. In nuclear warfare, we always kind of hit each other. You hit me back. With this, the smartest AI will sort of control all the others. So it's imperative that America or a democratic nation reaches it first.
Yeah, I mean, you always see, like in sci-fi, you just mentioned that, and I'm thinking probably a lot of our development is actually inspired by sci-fi. But, you always see ahead in the future, like Terminator, a dystopian future. And, I wonder, it is scary. It's exciting and scary at the same time.
It's very exciting. And I think we've been talking about some of the dystopian things, but can you imagine the medical discoveries that an AI might make? They might be, it might be able to cure cancer in the first 24 hours of its existence, and say, did you humans try this? Well, of course you didn't. This is what you need to do. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, wow. And some of our environmental problems, maybe AI can figure out ways to stop whatever we're doing and allow us to even do bad environmental things and still keep the planet pristine through nanotechnology and things like that. So there's a lot to be said for developing it. I've advocated for going to the very edge. When it becomes like almost as smart as us is when we need to pull back. But until then, let us spend as much money as possible to develop this, because it will be a big boom for economies, and it will also be very useful for science and technology. It will teach us.
Yeah, absolutely. Someone mentioned in the chat room about robotic surgical procedures. There wouldn't be any malpractice. There would be much less of it if you had, such accuracy.
My wife is an OBGYN, and they've told her, at conferences, be prepared that in 15 or 20 years, a robot might deliver babies, and it will do it 24 hours a day. It won't need 19 years of medical school training. It won't come with, college debt. And if it does something wrong, you'll just get another one. But I think the most important thing is it can actually work 24 hours a day. If doctors lose their jobs, and what, it's amazing. So, but that's the reality, is that, these things will happen, and they'll drop liability. This is why I'm not sure insurance companies can really survive the future. There just might not be so much destruction or tragedy or whatever that we have sort of now.
Or you may need to take a policy to protect yourself from AI. Yes,
no. Maybe that's the way they'll do it. They'll be like, Protect yourself from Terminator now.
Getting back to the power grid, I've heard statistics that say the power grid goes down nationally in the United States. We lose about 90% of our population within 3 years, it's hard to fathom that could happen. But we are so much relying on, what we have right now. To go back in the dark ages, I don't know. A lot of people they couldn't do it.
No. I mean, look, I've been formerly a journalist with National Geographic Channel. I've been to a number of war zones, and most war zones take place in areas where, not developed nations, already kind of developing nations or third world nations. And so it's hard, a lot of people in a developing nation have more of a survival instinct because they know how to fix a car because they don't have the brand new BMW X3s or whatnot. However, I can tell you that, if something like that happened in my city in, Mill Valley in San Francisco, these are people that know how to code. These are people that work at Facebook, and maybe, they have no idea. They wouldn't know how to fix a car. Nobody would be able to start anything. They wouldn't know where to get gasoline or how to create it. Nobody is a jack of all trades anymore. We're just all so specialized, and you could see society break down very quickly. A lot of people make fun of the preppers and these people that buy something up in the mountains, but I don't make fun of that at all. In fact, I have a vineyard in Argentina for exactly that reason on the other side of the hemisphere, because I know that if something terrible happened, we might actually have to go to a different hemisphere because of weather patterns. And the same thing with a place in Tahoe and stuff like that. I am prepared. I'm a bit of a paranoid guy. I keep a lot of rice in the house, a lot of water. I have 17 smoke alarms. I believe that things can go wrong very quickly. And anyone that doesn't know that is just not being realistic. We have come too far as a society. We should be careful. Preppers have they're doing something very wise.
Okay, I know you said you were short on time tonight, but I just another question, just a quick question is, what would you suggest? I'll put it this way: would you suggest if an implant is offered for banking that someone gets it? I know a lot of people are really afraid to do something like that. How you think they can be just as safe as anything else?
Yes. I think the first thing with banking and implants and stuff like that is that you just have to check your accounts all the time. I do this already. I mean, I just had somebody last year, we were on the campaign trail and somebody took my credit card not accidentally, but stole it. And all of a sudden they, charged $800. And if I wasn't checking it, then it would be like a nightmare that somebody would have done and I wouldn't have noticed. I think with the implants, you just got to follow the technology. There's going to be a lot of security technology. Anytime something like this comes out, immediately all the hackers go after it, and then all the anti-hackers or the security people. People often ask me, what's the field of the future? And I said, well, cybersecurity is the field of the future, because we're always going to, as technology becomes more and more ubiquitous, we're going to need more and more people to protect us, protect our privacy, but hands-on with your technology is what's very, very important to me. Is I still follow my banks, at least every few days I check my credit card charges. You can check who's been inside your house with this chip, because you can see, well, who else went into it. It's an RFID. So that is sometimes very useful, but you also have to, it opens up all sorts of other cans of worms and stuff like that. So, we just have to take it as it comes, but always be cautious.
Right. And so you're running for governor. I'll put that plug out there. You're running for governor in 2018.
Yes, I'm a Libertarian candidate for governor in California, and I'm one of the, I'd say one of the top 7 candidates right now. And, I'm pushing forth a basic income, and I'm pushing forth science and technology, and I'm also pushing forth protecting your freedoms, even though, I realize that technology is definitely challenging a lot of those freedoms. But, technology might also give us a lot of freedoms as well. So I'm, if you're interested in my candidacy, you can write me an email or check out my website or whatever it is. But I'm definitely all in with the running for governor in California.
Now, is Jerry done? Is he running also?
Yeah. No, Jerry's done. He's reached his term limit. The main candidate is his Lieutenant Governor, Gavin Newsom, who used to be the mayor of San Francisco. Yeah. And there are other candidates out there too. Most of the strength in California is from Democrats, but there's a few other Republicans. To be honest with you, I don't think I stand much chance of winning. A lot of what my platform is to represent radical science and technology, and to not let candidates go, through this entire process without asking the tough questions. I like to direct a lot of my op-eds and articles to them and say, why aren't you talking about automation? Don't just talk about Social Security and taxes like it's going to be here forever. Different ways of life are about to embark on us, about to happen. As politicians, it so upset me that Hillary and President Trump during the presidential debates never discussed radical science, never discussed AI, never discussed some of the more important concepts. So I'm trying to bring that to the forefront as a science candidate. And, I'm lucky that my publicity keeps growing. So, I might not win this time. Maybe I will next time.
All right. Well, just one last question, if you don't mind. The driverless car, do you think there's going to be some type of pushback in the government or type of regulations that'll make that not happen easily? I
do not. I think the driverless cars one is one that all the taxi, the taxi movement, the trucking movements, things like that, lobbyists, they're going to be fighting, but they're not enough in numbers to what the driverless industry is going to do in terms of economic terms. You're talking about entirely brand new cars. It's all the offshoots. It's all the new types of roads, it's all the new types of mechanisms that are going to be needed that actually make this more, I think, important economically than how many drivers are going to be replaced. Even if 10 million drivers get replaced in America, it's not going to offset what the economic boom is going to be from a driverless car industry. And I think ultimately that's going to sway Congress to say, well, this will provide more jobs and more economic benefit than the loss of jobs. We'll find you other jobs. At least that's what they're going to say. So I don't think Congress, they're going to fight it. Some people are going to say, for their constituents, in New York City, of course, the taxi lobbyists are so powerful, whatnot. But in real terms, a lot of the public, you and I, the amount of time we're going to spend working in our cars instead of spent traffic, that's going to be so much more productive for the American economy and also for paying more taxes than, whether a taxi driver or a truck driver loses their job. So I think Congress won't give it too hard of a time. What they're really going to be important is the safety factor. But like I said, the safety so far shows that driverless cars is far, far safer. So, and I think it's going to be far more efficient. The new age of driverless cars is going to be amazing because we grew up having to fight traffic, and I go out my road. I have to every morning wait for the red lights, all these things. When you're in there reading your paper or already working in your office, which is in a car, or you're doing a podcast from a car, and that's going to be brilliant. I think a lot of people underestimate how much our productivity levels are going to rise because of driverless cars, just on a personal level.
Wow, excellent.
And I just want to say, there's also all these other functions. You send your kids in the driverless cars to go to schools. You don't have to be with them. The car drops them off. There's so much about robotics that a lot of people miss. Already with the new Teslas, you can call your car to get you. So if you have mobility issues and you're getting out of a restaurant, but your car is parked 4 blocks away, you call it to you. I mean, people forget the kind of convenience that's going to come from having this vehicle that just listens to your every command. So sorry about that. Go on.
I was just actually going to say something about Tesla because I know, they're manufactured out your way. But the cars that come out now are all set up so they can be upgraded to just through software to be a driverless car. They're set up that way with the cameras are already. I saw one locally, and the guy was telling me all about it. So within a couple of years, when that technology is approved and everything, the Tesla cars that are built right now are going to be driverless.
Oh yeah. I mean, at this point, it's just going to be upgradable stuff. You're just going to do it through the internet like we do it on our iPhones. And every few months, it'll probably just get safer and better and more efficient and more functions.
All right. Hey, thanks so much. Can you actually say your website one more time?
Sure. For your viewers, it's zoltanistvan.com. That's ZOLTANISTVAN.com. But I'm also a columnist for a number of places, Vice, Wired, Newsweek, and all these other places I write articles for. So you can just Google my name to find out about me as well. So there's a lot of fun stories that I've written on all the topics we've
Great,
discussed.
excellent. Thanks so much. It's been a real pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
Absolutely. It's been a great pleasure to talk to you.
Take care.
Thank you so much.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for listening and watching on YouTube. And next week, we're going to be back with Bill Hall. And he's going to be talking about the Bridgeport poltergeist. Should be a fun show. So, again, I want to thank you all for listening. And we'll be back next week.